Hi, everyone. Happy Tuesday. This is Britt Gergen from Handshake. Thank you so much for joining us for our video conferencing webinar today. We're going to get started in just a minute, but before we do, we want to do our standard audio and visual check. So if you can hear my voice and if you can see the title slide, please hop on over into that questions panel and give us a quick hello. Perfect. Awesome. It looks like everything is working properly. If you're having any trouble, just let us know. But we will be back in just a minute to get started. And I wanted to say, hope everyone is staying healthy and safe and that your teams are all doing well. We hope that you'll find today's presentation really helpful as you move through this period. We'll be back in just a minute to get started. All right, folks, let's go ahead and get started. For those of you who are just joining us, welcome to today's webinar where we'll be discussing basics of video conferencing. We're really excited to have you here today, and I wanted to start things off by saying I hope you, your friends, your family, your team are all doing well and staying healthy. We are hopeful that today's content will help facilitate a lot of the transitions that I know schools are going through right now to bring a lot of their services to virtual channels. We are going to jump into the content in just a second, but a little bit of housekeeping to start us off. If you have questions during today's presentation, please feel free to use the questions panel on the GoToWebinar screen to send our team questions. We will be answering them throughout the presentation, and then we will also have time for open Q&A at the end. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you have a question that you'd like us to answer. And then I also wanted to share that we will be sending out this deck and a recording of today's presentation tomorrow in a follow-up email to everyone. That includes registrants and attendees. So if one of your colleagues couldn't make it, but they did register, they will still get a follow-up email with a recording and the deck from us. So with that said, I think we can jump to the next slide. So my name is Britt Gergen. I'm a product marketing manager here at Handshake, and I'm joined by two of my most wonderful colleagues, Tiffany and Joe. Tiffany and Joe, you want to say hello?
Absolutely. I'm Tiffany Taylor, and I'm our training and education lead here at Handshake, serving on our university team.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joe Wygoski. I am the University Support Manager here at Handshake.
Joe had a really great idea of us sharing as we are all experiencing something together, not only as a nation, but internationally. What have we been doing as we have been adjusting to doing even more of our work virtually than we have previously? And my little tip is not underestimating the power of when your workday begins and when it ends, because when you're sitting in one place, it's easy for that time to escape you. So definitely want healthy partners online with us today. So having a good start and end time for your workday, even if you're working remotely. What about you, Joe?
So I've actually been working fully remote for Handshake for almost 3 years now. I've experimented with a lot of different workflows working remotely, and the one thing that I keep coming back to that I find very important is establishing a consistent workspace. So if it's in office, if you have a room for an office in your place of living, that's fantastic. If you don't have quite room to do that, if you have a corner of a room, maybe next to a window that you can dedicate kind of as office space, that's fantastic. Or if it's just a table that you set up at the beginning of the day and you kind of take down at the end of the day, that's very helpful as well. Just somewhere where when you're there and you're working and you're focused, and then at the end of the day you can disconnect, because when you work from home, your work can kind of become your life. So the more boundaries you can set, the easier it is to make that transition from leisure time to work, and then back again at the end of the day. So just do what you can to establish a consistent workspace.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Joe. We want to just take a moment to acknowledge something that we're all having to go through right now, and it's working even more virtually than we have before. And no amount of gratitude goes out to you all as our partners, that the speed at which you all signed up for this webinar tells us something more so than coming to us maybe for help, partnership, and collaboration. But it's the priority that you have set in serving our students in ways that times that you are experiencing even what you are in our own lives. And so we just want to acknowledge that and tell you thank you for your continued and unstoppable service to students, and thank you for being here with us today so that we can impart some of our knowledge with you in some best practices to approaching video conferencing in as you try to provide your services seamlessly. We want to let you know that in addition to Joe and myself, we actually have an immaculate team of handshakers also on this webinar with us, who are in the chat answering your questions as they come in. We do have a couple pause moments within the webinar, within the talk today, where you can ask some ask some questions specific to those areas. So please feel free to have those on a rolling basis. With all honesty and pride, I can share with you that we have an extraordinary amount of folks on today's call, and so we definitely will not be able to get to everyone, but please know that we have made our concerted effort to get to those as uniquely as possible. Because today we are referencing several other third-party platforms and applications, we want to remind you to seek out those tools and those support partners so they can help you with more unique feature-specific questions as those come along. So now I'll just go over the overview of what we'll be chatting today about. And we're going to talk a bit about some of the other tools you can explore with respect to understanding, knowing that we use Zoom primarily at Handshake. And so that's where our quote unquote expertise, but maybe more so our experience, comes from. But a lot of what we're sharing today actually is applicable to many of the applications available. We know that some schools have contracts with particular tools, so we understand that you might be bound to a specific tool for your university. We'll then talk about creating a virtual link. We have some pro tips that we have learned, some from you, some from our own mistakes, and some of our learnings from managing many a call and virtual engagement. Specifically talking about hosting virtual events in Handshake. Joe and I have the proud opportunity to share with you something very, very new that has happened within our Handshake platform. Some of you might have found out about that from an email that went out to you last week. And of course, safety is very important to us, and just going over some safety tips that really apply when you have moved some of your services virtually, and again, an open Q&A moment. So we'll dive in to show some of those tools. Zoom, GoToMeeting, which you are on now, Cisco WebEx, different Google tools are also available. And just to reiterate that many of these tools you'd need to download from that company's specific site, and know that they, much like Handshake has our support team for our platform, you're going to want to really reference those own support teams for any feature specific items. Joe actually contacted Zoom support this morning and was able to share he was impressed with their levity, kindness, their ability to help him in under 20 minutes. So definitely reach out and employ the support teams of the platform you end up utilizing. Now we will dive into creating a virtual link, and Joe will do some step-by-step guidance for us with that.
Thanks so much, Tiffany. And yes, before we jump into a few of the places in Handshake where you can really utilize these virtual links to run video chats or video meetings, want to go over just a few options of different ways to handle those meetings. As Tiffany mentioned, we're going to review these workflows on a high level in Zoom because that's what we use. But hopefully you can take some of the ideas if you don't use Zoom back to whichever video provider you use and build those into Handshake using, whether it's WebEx or Google Meet, whatever your provider is, you can use it in that platform as well. But when we think about creating virtual links, there are really three types of links that we can create. The first one is a personal room. So this is something that you would use possibly for advising appointments if we think about kind of the Handshake setup. But what a personal room is, it's a link to a Zoom room that is completely yours. You can use it whenever you would like. It's always there and always available for use. You can invite students or colleagues as needed or as preferred for various events or meetings. But that's your link that you would typically want to be there to set up and host. Another option is to schedule an individual meeting. This would be if you're setting up like a one-time event, but what you would do here is you're looking for a unique link to host one specific video meeting. You would schedule an individual meeting. Within Zoom, if you go to the left-hand control panel, when you log into the web browser, you'll see a meetings tab, and then in that meetings tab, you'll see a schedule a new meeting just to the right. Once you follow the prompts in Zoom to create that meeting, on the meeting overview page, you'll see that URL. That URL is what you would send directly to a student or an employer, or it's what you would pop into Handshake to let students know where the event is being hosted. But this is something you would use pretty much when you're looking for a one-time link for an individual meeting. The third option, and within Zoom, this is the most difficult option to set up, is to really use any Zoom rooms that you already have to run those meetings virtually. Where you would use this is if you have a handful of events coming up in the same room over the next few weeks. Maybe you've already set them up, and now you're just transitioning those from in-person to virtual. If you just want to have one link for all of those meetings, so you can send one email out letting people know that the location's been changed from this particular in-person location to this meeting link. In Zoom, you can do that by editing some of the settings on the particular Zoom room. Note that you might not have access to this if you're not a system admin in Zoom. It also may vary a little bit depending on your subscription level. But if you do have the ability to do this, you would go to the users tab on the left-hand side. So you wouldn't go to room management. I know we are updating a Zoom room, but within Zoom, they really view that room's meeting link as a user. So you would go to the users panel. From there, you would select the specific room you want to edit. And then under the meeting options for that room, the two most important things here are, one, enable join before host. That Zoom room won't actually be used for the meeting because we're all doing this remotely. So no one will be there in office to actually start the meeting. So you're going to want to make sure that attendees can join that meeting before the Zoom room. You'll also need to add an alternative host down there at the bottom. That will allow somebody that's not the Zoom room to actually start the meeting. So whoever is going to be hosting that meeting, you'll want to pop their email address into that box so they can go in and they can start the event or the events at any time. I'm going to turn it back over to Tiffany now to go over some pro tips.
All right, I saw some questions coming in about, as Joe was sharing those great tips about how to utilize it within Handshake, and we will be getting to that right in our back half of this in just a minute. So hopefully many of those questions will be addressed. Before talking about some of the pro tips that might be feature specific, I want to let you all know that in all my years of doing video conferencing, I believe that hired professionals actually have the #1 tip, and that's the ability to show empathy. As you can imagine, in times where there might not be stable internet, everyone's usability with technology is different, that your guidance should be empathy and grace as you're engaging with students, employers, your teams coming in and out of meetings. So definitely keep that top of mind as you're navigating whatever tool you're using. For starters, a waiting room can help you determine when you want people to join, or if you want only certain people at a certain time, you want to see everyone who should be there. So that's definitely helpful when you're monitoring certainly back-to-back virtual events. Much like our ability to send you this recording afterwards, depending on the event that you are hosting, setting recording on cloud or computer gives you an ability to utilize that later on. In Zoom specifically, you can actually set them automatically to record, so you're not having to remember that time and time again. I know myself, I've forgotten and had to get nudged by a colleague to remember to record. Co or alternative hosts in a situation even like what we're hosting here. Joe and I had even spoken about, oh, well, if something happens to my internet and he's an alternate host, then he'll be able to take on proceeding with our virtual meeting. And so being able to transfer hosting ability even after the meeting has started is certainly a good tool to employ when someone else needs to take on a portion of the event. A host can mute all attendees. In a time when we're all still learning our own virtual style, you can imagine being able to mute attendees so you're not having 12 people speaking at the same time is going to really help with an efficiently run event or meeting. Breakout rooms for larger groups, I would definitely like to happily share. This is something we've been employing at Handshake more often than we have before. When we have large gatherings virtually, being able to break folks down into smaller groups of, say, 8 people instead of 24 or 36 is definitely going to be useful for, again, efficient groups. Is going to be helpful for smaller events if you're doing 1 to 5 meetings with advisors, peer groups, that using breakout rooms is going to be a helpful application for you. Adding staff members to large meetings to help monitor the chat room. As I have mentioned, Joe and I could not have done this today. Many of you are getting your questions answered in real time here because we have staff members who have been added to help monitor our questions in the chat room at this time. Leveraging the dial-in feature, going back to what I had mentioned, this actually in Zoom can be done on both sides. When you're managing uncertain internet access capability and audio, your ability to call a participant or your participant being able to call in definitely helps in cases where there are audio issues over the internet. And test. We actually meet 15 minutes before any webinar that you've ever attended in Handshake, this one included, to ensure that everyone's audio is working, and that we can hear everyone loud and clear, that we can see the chat room. Will definitely help, especially with larger events where you can't necessarily tell everyone, hold on, I'm still setting up. Now, what I know you all have been waiting for, we will launch into hosting your event virtually in Handshake, and I'll hand that back over to Joe.
And I want to just take a moment to add on to that last bullet point of test. Test. I will say also practice, especially if you maybe have an extra monitor at work and now you're running these virtual meetings from home and all you have is maybe a laptop screen. It's very important to get used to the flow of maybe sharing a presentation and then also having a couple messaging options open or having Handshake open in the background as well. So just do a practice run through of how am I going to navigate this video meeting or this video event. So jumping into hosting university events virtually, Last week, we talked a bit about how you can leverage the event functionality in Handshake to either move events to virtual or possibly as an alternative to hosting career fairs. Today, we want to jump in a little bit to what does that event setup actually look like in Handshake? So from the university perspective, when you create an event, there are a couple different ways to add a remote meeting location. The first way is going to be directly in the location box, as well as the description of that event setup. You'll likely want to utilize this option if you are setting up individual video links for each of your events. The reason for this is each time you create an event, you'll have to put in that location, that link into the location and to the description individually. You're not going to be able to do it in bulk. So if you're setting up individual meetings for each of your events, you'll want to enter that into both the location and the description. Currently in Handshake, these links are not clickable from the student side. They'll actually have to copy and paste that link into their browser to get to the remote meeting. This is something that we're working on updating, and we hope to have an announcement out to you that we've rolled out kind of live links for these events in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned for that. It's something we're working towards, but for now, students will just see that pop up kind of in Handshake, and they'll just copy and paste that into their browser. The other option here is to actually update the room that the events are attached to and add a virtual meeting link there. So if you do this, you're likely going to want to use that for Zoom as an example. You want to use that Zoom Room workflow where you can have a single link that's used multiple times for different events. If you do that and you throw that link into the name of the room, again, that's something that students will have to copy and paste into their browser. But the advantage of doing this is that any event that's currently attached to that room, the room will automatically be updated in Handshake. So if you have 20 events taking place in the same room and you're just changing those from in-person to virtual, you can utilize this room feature to update all of those at one time. Again, the setup up front is a little bit more complex and takes a little bit more time, but in the long run, if you're doing 20 or 30 events at a time, this can help. The other thing to keep in mind is when you do this, going back to the pro tip that Tiffany shared, add alternate hosts. Anytime you're setting up an event, particularly if it's on the larger side, if you have an extra host in case you're running a few minutes late, somebody else to get it started, or if you're having an issue with the internet, someone else to just jump in and cover while you work on that internet. Very helpful to have an alternative host. We're going to take a little break here and jump into some questions. And I know right off the bat, we've had a couple questions on how do you get that Zoom link to say joinhandshake.zoom.us. So that is actually not an integration with the product of Handshake. That has to do with the account we have set up within Zoom. So that's what our links look like when we have internal meetings, when we have external meetings. It's not an integration with Handshake. It actually just has to do with our subscription to Zoom. Yours may say schoolname.zoom.us, but that's going to be individual based on your Zoom subscription or your subscription to any of the other video providers, but that is not connected to the product of Handshake. In a similar vein, we've had some questions on, does the event or the interview happen through Handshake, or does it happen in another platform? So when you enter that URL into Handshake, that event's not actually going to be hosted on Handshake. It's just a way to redirect your students and your employers to the location of that virtual meeting. So again, it's not integrated directly into Handshake. We're redirecting you outside of the platform so that meeting can be run through Zoom, through Google Meet, through WebEx, through GoToMeeting.
We have another great question from Stephanie. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to repeat it here. I love all the new virtual employer events coming through the system. However, finding that because they outnumber our campus events is become increasingly difficult, for students to locate our events in the list. Is there a way to make it easier for students to identify events hosted by your university? Stephanie, thank you both for the call out and appreciation that there are more events, but certainly also advocating for your own university's event surfacing. Students can search by the host of an event, which includes your school as an option. If you'd like to promote this option to students, you can go into your student account, go to the events page, apply the host filter, and then copy and share the resulting link. It'll work for all your students. Thank you for surfacing that one. I'm sure that's one that many of your peers are experiencing as well.
All right, we have a lot more questions rolling in here. We're gonna move on to kind of our next subject here, but we'll pause again and get back to those questions in a few more minutes.
And Joe, if I'm not mistaken, is this our most exciting slide or not yet? Not yet. I'm jumping the gun, aren't I?
Not quite yet. Those updates are coming on a little bit later.
Clearly, I'm excited.
But I think this one is pretty exciting as it stands. It's not quite a new feature, but it's something that has been set up for virtual events. And those would be employer-hosted virtual events. So if you are running any events with employers, we always recommend, when possible, have those employers request the event. Hopefully it takes a little bit of the kind of that event management off of your plate. It takes a little work off of your plate and moves it to the employer. But equally as important, it gives the employer ownership of that event. And when we're talking about a virtual event, I think that's very important because the employer is likely going to want to host that virtual event on the platform of their choice. So if we were hosting a virtual event, we're familiar with Zoom, we're familiar with GoToMeeting. That might not work for all employers. They might prefer to use WebEx or Google Meets. When they request the event, it's on the employer to enter that URL. So they'll actually enter that URL when they're creating the event. If they've already created it, if no students have RSVP'd to it yet, they should be able to change that from an on-campus event to a virtual event. But if it's locked, or like if there are RSVPs already from students, they're just going to have to request a new event. So they're not going to edit that existing one. They'll just want to request an entirely new event. You can send a message to those existing students and just say, FYI, we've updated this event to a virtual event. You can find the link here. But that URL is something that the employer will generate on their side, and they'll enter it into the URL. Something else to keep in mind when you do this and when you do shift to a more virtual setup for your event and you push some of this workload over to the employers when possible, employers will have to have the role of post events in order to request events with you. So I would check if you're working with just a couple employers, you can do it individually from that employer approval page. Just check and make sure they have the post events permission. If you're doing it for quite a few employers, you can add that role via a bulk action on your employer's side. You'll see that screenshot down below. You just select the employers you want to add the role for, click add roles, and add the post events role. If you have a long list, you may want to add a label to each of the employers, filter on that label in your employers page, and then bulk add roles to all of those employer profiles. We're gonna take another pause here and look and see what questions we have coming through.
We have a great question here from Matthew that I'm sure will resonate with quite a few folks. I have heard some schools doing a Zoom room For walk-in, drop-in appointments, how would we recommend doing this? So typically these schools would usually publicize a Zoom meeting link to students and then use the waiting room feature we had mentioned at the top of our time together to manage incoming students. So they would create a Zoom meeting link, utilize that singular link, market it out, publicize it out to students, and then that is how folks would come in and out of that singular space.
We have another question here from Chris Turntine regarding the use of Zoom rooms versus an individual meeting link. So the question is, we often use the Zoom personal link functionalities. Zoom rooms are extra in the licensing agreement. Do you see any advantage in using a Zoom room compared to a Zoom personal link? I think Zoom personal links are a bit easier. I would use those whenever possible. The advantage of using a Zoom room would be if you have, again, a series of 10, 15, 20 events, and you have different hosts within your office for those events, it's a little bit easier through a Zoom room to have alternate hosts for those events so that you don't have to be the one actually logging into and setting up each of the events. So if you're going to have different people setting up those events, it may be easier for you to do it through a Zoom room. If you don't have Zoom rooms on your account, I think you can manage it very well through personal meeting rooms. Just make sure whoever's going to be the host for that meeting, make sure they're using their personal meeting ID. And again, probably adding an alternate host to that just in case. So there's no need to use Zoom rooms. There's just a little bit of a benefit. Like, I think if you're already set up to use Zoom rooms, I would look into that functionality. If not, I think you can make it work very well with personal meeting links or just scheduling new one-off meetings. All right, we're going to continue on here and move on to appointments. I know a lot of us have appointment questions, so we're going to dive into this one. So when you are moving your appointments to virtual meetings, you have a couple of options. And again, we'll talk through what those are and why you may use some. The first option is to update the office location for each staff member hosting the appointments. This is something you would do in your school settings. Oftentimes, schools will have, one for maybe their central campus, one for their north campus, one for their east campus or their west campus, that multiple people would share that office location for. In this instance, what you would want to do is actually create an individual office location for each staff member. And then in the location field for that office location, just put a link to their personal Zoom room. Again, when you set up a personal Zoom room, and it may be available in some other platforms, but you can use the waiting room functionality so that if an advisor has back-to-back appointments and their first appointment runs a little over, or you get that overly prepared student who logs on to the meeting 5 minutes early, the new incoming student will be sent to the waiting room for that meeting. So the career advisor can control when they're let in. They won't cut off or they won't hear any of the advising appointment before them. You can use that personal meeting room to manage which attendees can enter the meeting and when. But you'll do that in the office location on the appointment. And again, it'll look like this. When you edit the office location, you'll put, once you create that office location in school settings, you'll want to go to that specific staff member and on their profile page, change their office location to, for example, change it to Jade's office location or Tiffany's office location or Joe's office location. When you do this, this is one of our new exciting updates. The student will see an actual live link to that on their appointment screen in Handshake, so they don't have to copy and paste that link into their browser. They can just click on that link within Handshake and they'll be redirected to that video meeting. So that will show up as a live link. Yes, that is one of our two big announcements today. And again, just recapping what the waiting room looks like in Zoom specifically. The settings on the left-hand side of your screen when you log into the web browser, you'll just go to settings, then scroll down to the in-meeting section, and you'll see just an on-off switch for waiting room. The second option here is to use appointment mediums to add a Zoom room. So this is something where you would likely use this workflow if you set up those virtual Zoom rooms that we talked through a little bit easier, a little bit earlier. So this is where if you have multiple career advisors taking the same appointment medium, maybe they share one room for advising appointments, and they kind of just switch off maybe the day or the week who utilizes that room. You can set up that a link to that Zoom room in the appointment medium. So the student will log into that room, and then whichever advisor that appointment is with can just start the meeting in that Zoom room. Again, you'll want to make sure that all of the staff members utilizing that appointment medium are set up as alternative hosts in that Zoom room. So if you're using your individual Zoom link or your individual meeting link for these, I would probably recommend using that office location setup. Just note that if you do use the appointment medium setup for those personal meeting links, you'll want to make sure that that staff member is the only staff member that has that particular medium set up in their profile. And then just to recap, this is what those links will look like. In the office location is the top box. So Joe's virtual office is where the office location will show up. And again, that's showing up as a hyperlink. So students can just click on that live link and be redirected. And then the appointment medium would show up just below there where you see video call. We're going to take another pause here and look and see what questions we have coming in through the chat.
There's a consistent product question about if Handshake has plans about the ability to integrate with applications like Zoom, BlueJeans, WebEx, so that the functionality happens within Handshake. It's something that's certainly on our radar. There are no plans right now. These type of integrations do take a significant amount of time and resources. And what we have taken the opportunity to focus on is in the short term and faster product updates to help you. Case in point, the live links that we were able to surface for you today, which if I were to take a moment to give an incredible shout out to our engineering team being able to do that, to ship that out to you at a pace that you're able to use in real time now.
We have a question on appointments from Jenna Smith. So the question is, what about the appointments that have already been scheduled in the past using past locations? So if you are updating existing appointments, you have a couple options. One, if you update the appointment medium or an office location, if you edit an existing one, any appointments that currently have those mediums or office locations attached will automatically be updated. I think it's very likely that if you're using these workflows, you may be creating new office locations or new appointment mediums. In that case, there's no way to bulk update appointments that have already been scheduled. The easiest way to handle these would be to just pull a list of student email addresses that have those appointments currently scheduled. You can do it through the quick download on the appointment page, or you can do it through Insights. And if you have more specific questions on kind of exactly how to do that and how to get that list, please reach out to our support team. Happy to help pull those. But we would recommend you just pull those email addresses and email those students, whether it's a bulk email to all of them, letting them know if they have any existing appointments set up in office, they're going to be moved to virtual, and here's how they can log into that meeting. So for any existing ones, it would be just downloading a list of the student emails and sending a bulk message to them to let them know where they can find their online meeting. But it's a great question. Thank you, Jenna.
For career fair alternatives, what is the advantage to the employer to host an interview versus an event for them to manage? The interview option would allow you to have better visibility into who met with the employer. An event, on the other hand, would be slightly less confusing for students and easier to market, but you'd need to rely on the employer to provide attendance data. So that's really going to be for you to think about that employer, what's important for you now, what do you need, your communication with that employer, and what you need from that event to determine which of those might be best for you.
We have another appointment question here from Laura Author, among others. I think we had this come in a few times, but does the appointment link show up in the appointment confirmation and reminder emails and notifications that are sent to students? So right now, the office location name, the name will show up in the confirmation email. So actually, if you build that link into the office location name, that will show up in the appointment confirmation. Otherwise, the student will have to go to that appointment within Handshake to find that link information. We're also seeing some questions on interviews start to come up. So I think we're just going to jump over to facilitating online interview schedules. And we'll be back for more questions in a few minutes. So jumping into facilitating virtual interview schedules. First and foremost, when you're creating a virtual interview schedule, you're going to create it pretty much the same way that you create any other interview schedule. But just to start right off the bat, we always recommend including that it's virtual in the interview schedule name. Just get it right out in front of students at the beginning. As soon as they see that interview schedule, they'll know it's virtual. Can add some information into the description as well. But we will show you where to include those links in just a second here. So once you create that interview schedule, you'll want to create a pre-select or an open interview schedule. You want an interview schedule that's going to have slots. A room-only schedule won't allow you to build this link in directly there, but a pre-select or an open interview schedule will. Once you build the interview slots out, you can put a link to that meeting for the interview in the interviewer field. So you can put the interviewer name in addition to a link to that meeting. You'll just want to make sure that you have a link to that meeting in the interviewer field. When you do this, this is part 2 of our exciting updates. That link will be live to students after they take the slot. So once the student takes the slot, they will see a link to that interview room for the specific interviewer, only of the slot they selected. So you'll see the slot above or the slots below, the one the students are not assigned to. The student will not be able to see that interviewer. All of these slots do have interviewers attached, but the student will only be able to see theirs. This allows you to either use a unique meeting link for each student, or you can use the same meeting link for each student and just circle back to that waiting room functionality that we talked about earlier, where the interviewer just has the ability to control who comes in to the meeting and when. So you don't have to generate a unique meeting for each interview slot if you're using that waiting room functionality. I'd recommend popping the same link into each interviewer if you can use that waiting room. Just makes it a little bit easier on your end to set the interview schedule up. But either way, whichever works for you, the link attached to the specific interview slot is the only one that the student will be able to see. So you don't need to worry about students logging into different meetings if you do use different links. Before we jump into a few more questions, I'm going to turn it back over to Tiffany for some safety tips.
Absolutely. And actually, before I mention safety tips, we have a fresh update for you here. We had mentioned earlier, Joe had highlighted that the live links for the event locations, we are working on that. He had mentioned it would be ready in the next few weeks, and in fact, it should be ready within the next week. So hold on tight. We will get that out to you very, very soon so that you're able to use it as quickly as possible. Getting to our safety tips, As you can imagine, we're changing the way that we're doing things. And so our astute eye and observation for how information and managing our interactions needs to be adjusted as well. There's a feature in Zoom that you might want to consider disabling, join before host, so people can't necessarily begin before you arrive. This would be important if you need to monitor who is in that space or when people are able to enter, or so that it doesn't start without you or without your ability to monitor what is happening. Consider enabling co-host so you can assign others to help moderate. Disable the file transfer feature so there's no digital virus sharing. I have seen this, this feature is actually on quite a few virtual tools, just so that you're able to, again, be the deciding factor of what is shared, and so that that's not happening without you knowing. Disable allow removed participants to rejoin. If you have booted out an attendee for maybe behavior or language, someone who should no longer be there, if you disable that, then they won't be able to come back into that space. Consider requiring a meeting password depending on the type of event or meeting you're happening and when you're utilizing, and when a password might be important. Please know, as we had highlighted at the top of our time together, different tools have different capabilities and settings, but hopefully us surfacing to you what is possible allows you to dive a bit more deeply into the tool that you are using. Joe and I ourselves, in how long we've been using Zoom in our own exploration to prepare for today, had discovered even new tools within the Zoom function. We're going to hang out again. We're going to pause for a bit for some more questions. We certainly want to thank our Handshake Army that has been responding in real time to you all. And Joe and I will invest some more time in which ones we want to surface to everyone here as well.
A question we've seen come up a bit actually over the past week or two is, can university staff also schedule virtual meetings with students via Handshake? So people that traditionally don't have a career services account within Handshake, are they able to host appointments with students? So the answer to that is it's yes, but they would need a career services account. So if you do want some of your university staff that traditionally haven't used Handshake for appointments to be able to use Handshake to kind of manage virtual appointments, you absolutely can do that. You'll just want to set them up with a career services account. Of course, you may not want them to have access to everything that a traditional career services user has access to. So I would start with the career counselor segment on the roles page once you create their staff account. And from there, you can strip back permissions even further. Just make sure when you do create their account, they have the appointments feature so they can set up appointments for themselves and manage those within Handshake. So other staff members can host appointments within Handshake. They just need to create, or you would need to create career services accounts for them to be able to facilitate that. Jumping back to interview schedules, I think we covered this a little bit a couple slides ago, but seeing a couple more questions come in on whether you need one Zoom link per interview slot. Again, that's up to you. You can have a unique Zoom link per interview slot or a unique meeting link per interview slot. I know that is a bit more to manage. So if you do have one interviewer doing back-to-back interview slots, you can just create one link for them if there is some type of waiting room functionality so that they can just control who's coming in and out of that meeting.
There was a question asking about helpful resources that you are able to share with employers. Christine Cruz Vergara's email, which was sent out last Friday, was filled with resources that you are able to utilize yourself and share with employers, and we will do our best to do that as well in a recap of what you will get from attending this office hours time with us.
Another question we're having come in a few times here is just where the appointment links show up to students. So again, the office location name is the only field that's going to show up in that appointment confirmation email and reminder. If you use the location within the office location field or the appointment medium, it will be visible in the actual appointment within Handshake. This is something that we are talking about potentially updating at some point to add a little bit more visibility to those emails. But for now, it's just that office location name. So again, hopefully some updates about that in the future, but for now, it's just going to be in that office location name.
Someone asked earlier on how and where can breakout rooms be created? Specifically in Zoom, on the bottom of your screen, I'm trying to think visually right now, it should be closer to the right-hand side. When you have already started your meeting, you can then create the breakout rooms when at whatever time, but the feature is in an already created meeting room that has started.
Great question from Adam Barnes coming in here. What about checking students in that participate in Zoom virtual events or even interview schedules? Is there a good option for this to get reporting numbers? So if we're talking about events, you'll want to track students that sign into the event outside of Handshake somewhere. So some video conferencing tools may actually have the ability to report on attendees. So you'll be able to see anybody that signed in after. You can download a report, hopefully by email address. Once you do that, you can use the importer to import those students as attendees onto the event and mark them as checked in. So you can do that in bulk if we're talking about an event. If we're talking about an interview schedule, that's something where you would likely need to work more with the employer just at the end of the day to get a list of everybody they talk to. You can go through and manually check those students into the slots at the end of the day or the next week or any time after following up with the employer to just get a list of who actually showed up, were there any no-shows. You'll be able to manually record that in Handshake a little bit later on. We do, and then I have a question here from Angela Hildberg. Is there an article that explains how to bulk import for events? Yes, there absolutely is. I'm not sure if someone can find that. We'll try to post that in the chat, post a link to that article in the chat. Otherwise, if you go to our support center, support.joinhandshake.com, and just search import attendees, you should see that article pop right up. But again, I think we'll at least try to communicate that out in our chat box and just give you a link directly to that in a minute here. Also, some people asking about how do we communicate with event attendees. So if you are changing an event from in-person to remote, or if you want to send attendees a follow-up email after an event, if you go to that specific event page, on the left-hand side, you'll see a bulk action, something like create email or email attendees, and that will allow you to actually create a bulk email, a targeted email to all of the registered or checked-in students directly from that event page.
This one's pretty fun. If I use my personal meeting ID and waiting room function, then I can send everyone, student, staff, faculty, the same link, and you just admit them into the meeting once I'm already online and ready for the meeting. Absolutely, 100% yes. So that's what Joe had mentioned before about his preference when he chooses to use a personal meeting ID, because it gives you one source. It's like one door that everyone gets to knock on, and you get to tell them when they can come in.
And then we have a question here on do you have a more like detailed step-by-step instruction on how to set up that waiting room within Zoom? So again, this waiting room feature is something that's a Zoom specific feature. Again, it may be available in like Google Meet or WebEx. I'm not sure on those. I know it is available in Zoom, but for a detailed instructions on how to actually turn that waiting room functionality on, that's something that you'll update in your personal settings within Zoom. I would take a look at Zoom's Help Center. If we can find something, we'll throw it in the chat here. But if not, I know that's something that Zoom has laid out step by step of just how to access your personal meeting room settings and how to flip that switch on. I think I was looking at that one actually a little bit earlier yesterday, and they've got a great step-by-step article with screenshots of you might even have a video as well actually, but just of how to navigate that and turn that specific setting on. And I think Britt actually had uploaded that into chat. Thanks so much, Britt. That was very, very quick. So if anybody doesn't see those articles, just let us know if those aren't coming through, but you should see those in the chat box on your GoToWebinar control panel there. There's another question in here for career fair alternatives. So if we're thinking of either moving kind of some of those career fair touch points to events or interview schedules, what's the advantage of using either an event over an interview schedule or an interview schedule over an event? So an event is going to be a little bit easier to set up, and I would actually refer you back to the webinar that we had late last week, and we'll link that out in our follow-up email. But we go through a little bit more detail, like what that looks like to set up kind of in a career fair alternative as an interview schedule or as an event. But if you do it as an interview schedule, it's a little bit more labor intensive to set up, but it can help facilitate that one-on-one interaction between the employer and the student. If you set it up as an event, it's going to be more of a group session. From there, again, it's on the employer. If they want to try to utilize breakout sessions to meet with smaller groups of students, they absolutely can. But setting it up as an interview schedule allows you to specify meeting times for each student and just segment that out a little bit more. So it gives you more control over the times people are meeting at. Where setting it up as an event, we'll just set it up as a group meeting, and it's a little bit less trackable within Handshake if you set it up as an event.
I do appreciate some pair-to-pair sharing and learning. And so just a reminder that at Handshake, we are utilizing more than a basic Zoom account. And so just good to know that obviously any of the applications do have some limitations based on the level of the account that you might have. If you're logged out after 40 minutes for 3 or more participants at the same time, when you're in Zoom. And on the other hand, many of the features I was able to find out as we were exploring and preparing for today were not Zoom specific. For example, WebEx also does have a waiting room feature. So a portion of what we were also hoping today is that what we were surfacing allows you an opportunity to research a bit more, either the tool that's already available to you, or explore the one that you're using or your institution is using for some of the features that you might be underutilizing at a time now when we need them most. I think we are just on the nose of time, checking in with the fabulous Britt to see if there's anything else before we close out, before profoundly thanking you all. I know we weren't able to get to every question, but hoping that what we were able to get to both towards the larger group and with the phenomenal team answering one-on-one was helpful to you all. And to recap again, that we will be sending a recording from today as well to everyone who registered and was in attendance. Britt, anything to close us out?
No, that was going to be my main thing. And I did want to say that if there are more follow-up questions after today's presentation, please don't hesitate to reach out to your relationship manager or to our support team here at Handshake. We'll be more than happy to continue the conversation with you. And again, just to say it one more time, we will be sending the recording tomorrow. I know Tiffany just said it, but yeah, we'll send it tomorrow. So definitely review that. Because there's a lot of really great nuggets that have been shared today. I want to give a big round of applause to Tiffany and Joe for putting this together. I think this has been really fabulous. Awesome. So again, yeah, I think we'll wrap up for today. Please don't hesitate to reach out again if there are any follow-up questions that we can help with. And thank you all so much, Joe and Tiffany. You want to say goodbye?
Ciao,
Absolutely.
enjoy the live links.
Bye, everyone. Thanks so much.
Stay safe and healthy, everyone. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. Bye-bye.